So Mackenzie Mathis is the Bertarelli Foundation Chair of Integrative Neuroscience and an assistant professor at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. We're especially excited to hear about her work with DeepLabNet, creating easy-to-use tools for pose estimations in animals that can be used for behavioral and kinematic analyses. Her team's put a lot of effort into making their work usable by non-ML experts, which enables ecologists and behavioral researchers to analyze data they collect in the wild a lot easier. So we're really excited to hear about your work. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you so much. And you guys can see my screen, the correct one, I guess.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me here. So I'm a neuroscientist and I deeply care about measuring behavior. Arguably, we've learned the most that we know about the brain through the study of behavior. So in today's talk, I'm going to have a bit of a different scale, kind of jiving off of Sara here. These are the large scale data sets about tracking over huge ranges. But what I'm actually interested in terms of trying to understand how the brain generates movement is typically at the scale of individuals or smaller social groups, but capturing really detailed kinematic analyses, so the posture of these animals. And so if we think about behavior broadly, it's extremely diverse, it's very complex. Imagine just having these two zebras who might be playing or they might be fighting for territory. So the simple question is, how can we actually quantify this? If we want to do this non-invasively to capture this behavior, videography is a really great approach. And so from videos, we can really train now deep neural networks to acquire both postural data. Sorry, this is not plain. Postural data, of course, get information about animal identification. And then ultimately, and what we've heard a lot about, we can do this population and even individual movement analysis at the level of different actions or these kinematics. And so just to give you a brief introduction to this, in general, every frame of video captures part or all of the animals. And the goal that we have is to extract from the pixel level these lower dimensional embeddings of the posture themselves. So going from these images and frames to actually this key point representation. And so we can do this with so-called pose estimation algorithms, which I'll delve into a bit more. But ultimately what this gives you is essentially a skeleton that can be used for these downstream tasks, such as looking at kinematics, potentially in relation to neural data, looking at actions, and ultimately going to the level of biomechanics and modeling of these animals at the individual level. And so behavior, as I mentioned, is extremely diverse. So from the lab to the wild, there's a myriad of applications for pose estimation in general, right? You can really think of it as this step to digitize and make this lower dimensional embeddings in your data. So pose estimation became very popular in the late 2010s when deep learning models trained on tens of thousands of images from different humans started to show the level of performance that you would get with traditional message, like motion capture suits. So how your favorite films like Avatar and so forth are actually being made. And so in general, it wasn't very clear from these large scale data sets on humans, you could get this incredible performance, but it wasn't clear at the scale of, say, animal data sets, which are typically much, much smaller, that this was.
Mackenzie, we've just lost sound on you. Is that for everyone?
Yeah.
Is she hearing me?
I don't think so. We can't hear you.
Connecting to audio?
Oh, that's so weird. Did it disconnect me from audio? Okay,
yeah.
So where did you guys hear me? That's so wild. Should I just start again?
It was pretty quick. So maybe just
like 15 seconds ago. Yeah.
The roll.
That's so strange.
Yeah.
Okay, so very, very briefly, I will just go through. The short answer is that behavior is super complicated. We want to be able to take these sort of pixel level representations within frames and deduce these down into a lower dimensional embedding, which we call these key point representations, because ultimately what this gives you is a skeleton or a skeletal representation of this data. And these skeletons can be used to do things like kinematic analysis. We've heard a bit about that today. In our context, we want to do this with paired modalities such as neural data, or looking at action spaces of animals, or all the way through to biomechanical modeling of individuals. All right, so behavior is super diverse. As I mentioned, from the lab to the wild, there's a huge range of potential applications. And so when we started in this field, deep learning methods were just showing really good performance on these large scale human data sets. So if you have tens of thousands of labeled frames, it starts to approach like the level of marked motion capture. These are like how you get your avatar movies in front of a green screen. And so in short, there was a couple different challenges that really have come up over the years when we started working in this. The first bullet point sounds relatively obvious, but animals have really different body plans. So it's not that we could just leverage something like the human skeleton and use this across, right? From cheetahs to even mice in the laboratory, it's not potentially clear how you would map that. It's also not desirable to build tools that only if you have these really large scale data sets people can use, right? We wanted to make this usable at the small scale, at the level of the laboratory for people. We also, of course, wanted to track behavior in beyond just 2D, so even 3D posture in a single frame. And of course, 4D and beyond behavior is not two-dimensional or not even three-dimensional, to be honest. This has also been touched upon today, but we want it to be fast, right? We want to be able to deploy these things in the real world for real-time, low latency feedback to animals. And we wanted to tackle things like multi-animal tracking, where the animals can look so highly similar, like it's very hard for me to tell apart two black 6 laboratory mice in my group. And we also want, of course, as Sara nicely mentioned, generalizability. We want to work towards robust solutions. So how do we actually get to that? So when we started working on this problem, our early scientific contribution to the field was to show that we could take models trained on these large scale data sets for classification and fine tune them on our target data set for pose estimation. So Imagenet is this incredible data set. I don't have time to talk about all the merits of this beautiful work, but in short, the general idea is if you have a large corpus of data, you train a convolutional neural network to produce the label cat if it gets this image. So what ultimately we wanted to do is say, can we transfer this neural network, build out new deconvolutional heads, and instead of saying cat, we actually just want the key points of this animal. And so that's what became Deep Lab Cut. Thank you for the very nice introduction. But in general, it's not meant just to work on mice or zebras or cheetahs. It is really built as a tool across ecology, life sciences, neuroscience, you name it. So it's been used for things like cancer cell tracking, of course, a lot of experimentation in laboratories. I just want to say it actually has a really big user base and we really kind of pride ourselves. I mean, it's humbling, but it's amazing to have such a large group of people that are using the tools. And that means also for you, there's help, there's a community. So if you're just diving in, there's a lot of people that are there to assist you. And so, I mean, of course, as I potentially alluded to already, Deep Lab Cut is open source. It's built fully on the Python stack. We take innovations from computer vision. It's deployed on GitHub. We have a lot of interfaces for you to use, GPUs for free from Google if you want to test these things out, because it's much, much faster on this type of hardware. We also provide a lot of tools for large scale computing. So if you want to do distributed computing and at scale, this is possible. I won't talk about this at all today, but there's some like kind of, laboratory specific, neuroscience specific tools to do this in real time. And the really fun thing about being an open source developer, I think it was touched on the last talk, is that people use and build on these tools. So there's a lot of other what I call post-pose estimation packages that allow you to analyze your data in much greater detail, right? Because you can think of this as essentially key points over time. So this is time series analysis. So what I want to do, excuse me, in the last few minutes is kind of give you an example, potentially for this crowd to, I don't know, inspire you or get feedback also from the community. So one of the things that, this is a real-time video, by the way, of a cheetah in a sanctuary in South Africa. And one thing that we want to do in general is enable researchers to ask interesting questions. So we teamed up with Professor Amir Patel's group, where they wanted to build, or they want to build robots that have tails to do better high-speed turns, much like a cheetah. And so with them, in the last few years, we've been working on new methods for doing 3D reconstruction across very consumer-grade cameras and trying to clean up potentially any of the errors that can result from like using these type of GoPro cameras and so forth, with all the distortions, all the potential issues of tracking the fastest land mammal, which of course is very fun. In short, we ended up building a reasonably sized data set to also release to the community with both 2D and 3D data, so they can build on this work as well and try to You know, we don't always have to have the best models. It's very fun to be in a community that's really active and pushing, but nonetheless, we did come up with some new ways to do this. So this is just a projection of the 3D onto the video, but maybe you can appreciate this more or less in real time. So here's what you essentially get is a cheetah moving through space. Our trajectory optimization method then globally can stitch and optimize the trajectory using kinematic features across time. And so that, of course, is the blue here, and triangulation, just purely using the geometry, would be the red. All right, so, you know, where to get started is sort of the next potential question in a very short talk. But one big thing that kind of presents itself is that, do you want to build your own model, or do you want to use something that's pre-trained? At this point in the community, there are a series of models that are available. I have an animation to remind you that this is from a primer. So if you're just jumping into this field, it's really going from the principles of deep learning all the way through to the pitfalls and perspectives of using these types of tools. But in short, you can think about if you want to build them. Our tool, Deep Lab Cut, is either advanced as you want to be using the CLI interface, or at the same time, a fully graphical user interface. It's just point and click. You don't need to know any computer vision or programming to use this, whether that's on your house cat or a cheetah. All right, and so models like the full cheetah, of course, we publicly make these models available. But you know, this is already still in a very particular setting in South Africa with these cameras and these things. So it's not going to just generalize well to other cheetahs like in your local zoo or sanctuary. And so that really brings up the question of, like, how do we actually build better pre-trained models? And so one thing that we've you know, kind of contemplated is, it seems like a bit of a wasted opportunity, not to mention CO2, if we're not building community-driven models in a way that that can be leveraged by many, many people. And so in life sciences, for example, you know, there's an estimate of either 20 to 100 million black 6 mice used in research every year. And it doesn't make sense for labs to only make neural networks for their own applications. But the problem then arises when someone labels like data set 1, and then you have data set 2 with different key points. And actually how you train these models, I won't get into the details today, but you're often penalizing missing data, or you're not back propagating. You need to differentially back propagate this error from different data sets. And so in short, I've had a really talented PhD student over the last years who's been working on and trying to develop new methods to jointly train across these diverse data sets and get quite, I think, impressive zero-shot performance, meaning this is data that's not included at all in training the model. So this would be, say, if you had a model that you wanted to track these 4 key points, but you didn't have any other annotations of all these other key points, you just fed it into this neural network. This is the type of data that you would get out. So what this means practically, so it's a complicated graph, but MAP, the higher the better. And in the zero-shot setting, you can see a 20 to even 80-fold improvement over, of course, a model that doesn't have this type of initialization, what we call these super animal networks. This doesn't just work for lab mice. We want to build these to be very usable and deployed in the wild, like the real wild. And so we've worked on data sets that have you know, everything from antelopes to zebras to wolves to dogs to cats, cheetahs, horses, etc. And then we held out some animals based on, you know, relatively abnormal shapes, so like elephants and giraffes and rodents, which were never seen in training. And this is what you're seeing is zero-shot performance in this setting. And so, of course, you know, how do we do this? There's some smart training, but also just a lot of data, right? So this has also been alluded to. And so we've been collecting data from a lot of different data sets and including community sourcing this data. So we have this website. We've teamed up with individual researchers. So this is a very large project working on great apes. And so we're hosting the infrastructure for them. So they have an easy web interface to label their data. So this is something that any of you are excited about. This is now quite easy for us to set up. Of course, it's your data. We don't own it. It's for the community. And then these models can be shared very broadly. So I hope in this short talk with some funny technical delays that I've convinced you that pose estimation is quite an interesting way to, as a way to get digitize your data to do behavioral quantification, whether that's in doing kinematics or actions or biomechanics and modeling. Of course, I didn't go through all these things. And as a last note, I wanted to just say, I didn't talk about it in today's talk, but we've also looked recently at a re-identification of animals purely from this visual data, right? So these are unmarked animals in any way. We've devised new methods to track them and re-ID them. So even if they leave the scene and come back in, of course, we haven't tried this in every crazy setting, so we'd be really happy for the community's feedback, but this was just published in Nature Methods a few weeks ago. So with that, I'd like to thank my incredible team, my long-term collaborator, Alex Mathis, who's really pioneered this work with me. In particular, Maxime Vidal, who works on this contrib module for getting data across people, Shauka Ayi, who's worked on this model zoo and super animals, and Jesse Lauer, who's one of the Deep Lab Cut head developers. And I would be remiss not to thank my funders, in particular, the Chen Zuckerberg Initiative, who has funded the code development and maintenance, in particularly, and supporting the community. So thank you guys so much for your time, and looking forward to the discussion.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm very conscious of time, so I'll just allow, okay, there's a lot of questions just dropping in. The first one I'm going to allow, Tony, do you want to jump in?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Hi there. That was a great talk. I just had a question about when you did the 3D modeling of the cheetah running, did you use two cameras, or was that just off of a single camera?
Yeah, so for that project, to build up the data set, we actually had 6 GoPros, but we have worked on methods to lift now from a single camera perspective. Certainly if you have 3D data, you can train a model to just predict 3D from 2D. But what we showed in the paper and the data sets released is from 6 camera views, so others can build on top of this work.
Okay, and sorry, just a follow-up question. So
sure.
I saw that you had like the cells, that there was some cell tracking examples that was being used. So
yes,
is this basically transferable to any sort of movement?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it actually doesn't even require movement. It's a frame-by-frame detector, and so in that sense, it can leverage just even information in a frame. So some people use Deep Lab Cut for like fiduciary markers on a wild, like a checkerboard. You could use it for to stabilize the image and calculate an allocentric viewpoint or egocentric if you needed. So there's no particular motion priors that are required for the tracking. Of course, if you have motion tracking data, that can be leveraged by the model as well. So if you have video data, it can be used.
Okay, really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Ran, I think yours is a really interesting question. Do you want to jump in? And then I'm going to ask a big closing question.
Sure.
Ran, yes,
me? Yeah.
I did. I'm sorry, I didn't give you a 10-second warning, but do you want to jump in?
Sorry, but I think there were several other questions.
No, I think yours is interesting. Could go for it.
Okay. So how we apply all these methods to track wildlife in the wild? That's, I think, the big concerns, and it's quite short, it's quite limited in space. You need lots of infrastructure for the batteries and everything. So what is the most optimistic case for fieldwork in 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And of course, my domain expertise doesn't solve all of these problems. So I think maybe I can give two toeholds into the problem. So one is that, of course, there's no a priori limitation at the software stage for tracking over long time scales. So we put up cameras and film like marmosets in quite wild-like environments in a smaller range, but over days, months, weeks, and ultimately we scale up to years. That being said, as you said, these are hardwired cameras with battery, and this is not deployable. And I think someone mentioned, following zebras with a drone is not potentially a great idea, like these types of things. So I don't necessarily see it as like this is going to be the only way ever to do this, or certainly in the next 2 years. What I do think, and what's been brought up, is that this is just another type of data modality that can be used when you have it to do modeling at different scales. So if you have, let's say, a home nest area of eagles and you have that video data at the perch, you can do really interesting behavioral analysis that couldn't be revealed just by these long treks. But at the same time, you can use that to jointly model and get sort of individualistic signatures at a higher resolution. So you might look at probable or, you know, like predictive models of saying like, you know, is this bird taking care of its, I don't know, baby bird? Sorry, I'm clearly not an ecologist here. You know, and then try to understand, is that affecting its future flight plans because it's actually spending so much time in the nest versus foraging, right? So I think like that's the type of level analysis that I'd be super optimistic about in the next years. But I think you raise a great question that, you know, there's some hardware limitations that will have to be overcome for all of us to deploy these things at really the scale that we would ultimately like to do this non-invasively.
Guys, I love that there's
yeah.
big discussion happening in the chat, and no, you're good. That was great. There's a big discussion happening in the chat. I realize we're close to time, and we've just been like, you guys have given us such a gift of really meaty talks and really shining a light on where we could be going. And I think I speak for a lot of people and how inspiring they were. And we often get, I think as conservationists, we get stuck thinking very close in the future and thinking very practically about how things can be applied, and very cautious about hype. But it's been so wonderful to hear about actually where we could be going, and to see the tools that you're already developing and thinking so clearly about accessibility and usability for a lot of conservationists and other users. So my wrap-up question, and apologies that we haven't had a discussion, but I feel like a lot of the stuff will be picked up in the next session as well. My final question for everyone I'd love to hear from would be, like, what's your number one development on the horizon that you think would completely revolutionize what we're doing right now? And if you want to throw in a part B to that, what makes you feel optimistic about the future? Sara Beery, do you want to go first?
I think actually I use MoveBank and like the movement ecology community as an example a lot of the time to other like communities in ecology that use different types of data as like this wonderful guiding light of like what is possible when you do kind of work together as a community to build this like shared infrastructure and this shared access to data. And I do really think that like just like looking at how that's made things like the amazing work that that Christen was showing possible in a way, because like he was able to then actually look across all of these different types of species, pull together these things, like test this and understand, is the method we're developing, you know, only valid for some species and not others. And so I think, you know, you guys should all in this community pat yourselves on the back for really like doing that early and doing it reasonably well. And I think I'm quite excited seeing that type of, you know, data ecosystem and this sort of slow shift in the ecological community to like data as being immediately valuable to everyone, as opposed to something that you need to keep and hoard until you've published on it sufficiently. I think the more that we see that changing, like the more I think we're moving towards a space where we can build non-siloed, like large scale understanding about what's going on.
Thanks, Sara. Somayeh, do you want to have a crack at it?
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited with the availability of different types of data sets that we have, both on human side and animal side, and you know, not only movement data, but also environmental data that we have to connect the two and basically use it for prediction. So my future research focuses a lot on prediction of movement and using data integration and data fusion.
Awesome. Christen, do you want to, what do you think is on the horizon and what makes you feel optimistic?
I think, you know, getting all these statistical methods settled where you don't have scale dependencies, where you can compare data that have been sampled at different scales and different types of data, and integrating all those things together. I think there's just a kind of possibility for things that I can't really quite imagine what's going to come out of that. Just anything from like scaling laws to, I don't know. I just think there's a lot of possibilities.
Awesome. Mackenzie, do you want to have the final word?
Oh, that's a big honor. No, I'm excited about a lot. I mean, it's very inspiring to just see the communities coming together. I think Sara captured that really well. And yeah, I'm personally like super excited about multimodal data streams. So I think that is one area that we're working on a lot. And also trying to solve big challenges in, say, dimensionality reduction over continuous data sets, and doing this in robust and have like theoretically guaranteed sort of embedding spaces. So that's kind of the frontier that we're working towards. And I think that this community has like the incredible data sets to do it. So I'll be really happy to talk with others in this space again. Thanks.
I'll wrap us up by saying thank you so much to all of our speakers. They really, the talks were really incredible, and we really appreciate your time joining us today. Final plug, we, as of last week, have launched our new Wild Labs community platform, which is shiny and beautiful and designed. It's taken us 2 years to build, and a lot of wonderful new features are coming in the next few weeks. So we really encourage you to pop on and check it out. And the information and members should be much, much more accessible and easy to use. So do pop on there. We have groups for AI for conservation, biologging, and all sorts of conservation tech groups. So do use that community as well to collaborate and discover the conservation tech world. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll see you in 2 weeks. The registration for our next event has just opened up, so do get your ticket and we'll see you back here. Thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.